Good day. I'm Northern Shipyards. Today's project is the Carbonite Hero Panel replica with an ISS tracker built into it. I wanted to do something like this for a while, and I wanted to scratch build every greebly on it. In a previous video, I went through how I scratch built, molded, and cast the basic panel itself. This is what we're going to use in today's project. The story comes about in wanting to replace this useless wireless thermometer we have in our kitchen. Not much of a display, it never really worked. It has this useless clock down here at the bottom. I thought I could do better. The thing is, my wife and I just finished a kitchen reno, and I thought this was a chance to work something like this in, maybe unnoticed. She's probably going to say it doesn't match the aesthetic, but I think it blends in really nicely. What about this? Do you think she'll notice? You think she'll like it? Ninja Greeblies. I think it blends in perfectly if you ask me. I think this is going to be just great. But instead of a weather station, I thought it'd be much more better to make an ISS tracker. I mean, come on, who doesn't want one of these in their kitchen? It's going to be awesome. Here we go. So the first step is to spray some primer on the cast. This is my go-to primer. It's epoxy primer from Class Coat. What I like about it is that it goes on really super thin, really slick. You get a nice coating that you can actually buff, and I tend not to burn through. I'm really impressed with this stuff. You mix it with reducer, it's a 1-to-1, and it just works really nicely. I typically don't use rattle cans, but I did for this project. It seemed to have a really nice color match. This is from Duplicolor, Heather Mist Metallic. Went on nicely, got a great result from it. Unfortunately, I hit the wrong button on the camera and didn't get a picture of the final spray result. Here's a picture of the Hero panel itself. I'm going to start with this grill right here. My first attempt was a failure. What I wanted to do was etch some brass with ammonium persulfate, so I used a vinyl mask to cover. It turned out just too thin. It wasn't strong, it was really flimsy, unimpressive. When I buffed one edge, it buckled. I put primer on it just to see, but it wasn't going to cut it. So the second attempt was the hard way. I used the existing files for the mask to 3D print, mold, and cast the grill. Here it is ready to cast with a little baby powder already on it. To get a flat bottom side, I found that using a piece of acrylic with the protective film still on it works really nicely. The resin tends not to stick on it. What you do after you pour the resin and knock out any bubbles is start on one side, flexing the acrylic, and just sort of chase the resin to the other side. Then I usually put some weights on it just to be thorough. Once the acrylic is mostly set, I use a small spatula and pry off the acrylic. You can use masking tape to lift off all the flash. That works really nicely. And then what you're left with is a good clean cast. Here it is with some primer. And to get a nice metallic finish on this, what I'm using is some rub and buff. These are the same, just one is beaten up and you can't see it. I use a pretty decent amount each time, working it in really vigorously with a circular motion. I apply less pressure as I go, and that seems to bring out the shine really nicely. It's pretty impressive stuff. If you haven't used it before, I'd give it a shot. Next up, in the display here, we have some microchips. I didn't even try to ID them. I decided I was just going to scratch build them. For the legs, my first attempt also didn't work. I wanted to use ammonium persulfate to etch them using the same mask technique as before. They just got a little chewed up. The mask started to lift. They really thinned out. When I tried to cut out the backside with the wheel, I realized it was just not going to cut it. Since that attempt didn't work, I decided once again to do it the hard way. I went to my friend Adam Maurice at North Simcoe Waterjet, who really came through for me in a pinch and did some of this cutting for me. I took a 0.25mm piece of brass and sandwiched it between two pieces of aluminum. The result was really nice and clean. I was really happy with this. I cut extras just in case, you know. I gave him a quick buff with stainless steel, cut him out just using scissors, and these were the end results. Really nice. Then I used these castings for 3D prints I made after designing the microchips to fit. I assembled the legs and added a sexy dose of thick CA, placed the backer and clamped them. And this was the little family of microchips as a result. They fit really nicely and worked out perfectly. Pretty happy with them. So that brings us to the perf board itself. I mentioned this in a previous video. I use this as a real-life ruler to size up the proper dimensions of those windows they go in. Even though the microchip legs are 1/4 millimeter thick, they were still a little bit of a nuisance to place in the perf board, but they worked out nicely. And then once they were all placed, I trimmed off the legs and soldered them to secure them. I mean, come on, who doesn't like soldering? I can't think of a more delightful way to spend time. These are rims for the displays, which will eventually go in there. Here's the finished result. And here I've placed them in the master so you can see how they fit. Next up are these greeblies. I think they're wire crimps, but I just don't know. I made them out of nested styrene tubes. I didn't mold or cast them, this is just a scratch build. But then I added a copper ring at the bottom to bring the lower diameter out to the right size. These will hold screws securing items on the bottom side. Next up are the knobs here. There are two. They're basically the same size. One of them has a bevel on the edge. So I put some aluminum stock on the lathe, turned them down to the right diameter, knurled them, faced them. While I really love my lathe, it does have a bit of chatter. When I use the parting tool, it tends to resonate, and the sound is offensive, so I'm going to dub in something a little more pleasant for you today. And this is the result. Next up, we're going to tackle these lower LEDs along the bottom. I have a go-to mold that I use for these light covers along the bottom. I tend to use a lot of them. They were used in that gold thing from Star Trek Insurrection and in the thermal detonator, but for this purpose they were a little too wide. So I cast one, turned it down on the lathe, and then made another mold. The cast turned out pretty nicely. I printed, cast, and painted a silver cuff for the bottom edge. It seemed to fit the part well. I laser cut a piece of white acrylic and secured these in there with some epoxy. Next up are the handles on the sides. To get a good bend without breaking, I wanted to anneal this aluminum rod. Take a Sharpie and draw a line on it. Then slowly heat it up until the Sharpie ink disappears. At that point, your aluminum is nicely annealed. For the T's, this was almost cheating. I 3D printed, molded, and cast what I needed. Painted them silver, and that was that. Real easy. Next up are the 7-segment displays themselves. In the Hero panel here, you can see they're very distinctive. I didn't even bother trying to hunt them down. For my purpose here, I wanted to display the ISS latitude and longitude here, so I had to come up with a different display. The space was limited, and instead of trying to find a 4-segment display, I wanted to just scratch build them myself. It sounds crazy, but I've scratch built 7-segment displays before. In the Zorg door bomb, I couldn't find the one they used, so I scratch built them, and they worked out really nicely. So here I needed 4 digits. To simplify things, I chose not to use a segment driver, but I used addressable LEDs. It really means that just 3 wires are needed for the whole thing. So I designed some circuit boards and had them fabricated. Added some solder with a stencil, painstakingly placed the LEDs, and I used a microscope to nudge them into place. I used this halogen reflow oven to bake the circuit boards. I found the design on GitHub a number of years ago and modified the code for a bigger screen and those sorts of things. It works out really nicely. The halogen bulb prevents thermal overshoot, and it follows a curve precisely. It's so close. For the capacitors on the other side, I decided to micro-solder them myself. This is often one of the most zen things I can do. I make small little chips of solder with the scalpel, attach them to some painter's tape to pick up easily, and then one by one solder the caps. I usually settle down with a nice cup of coffee or tranya. This might seem crazy, but it's a pretty relaxing experience and I really enjoy it. For the segments themselves, I cast a facing in light blue resin. And then I 3D printed the segments in clear resin, but didn't cure them. I wanted them to be a little gummy. One by one, I forced them into place, and they're held nicely just by friction. I printed up a smaller face on the back side, and again didn't cure it because I wanted it to be gummy. And surprisingly, it fit over them really well. This back end produces little cavities for the LEDs to fit into. I filled those little cavities with latex. So what we have here are only parts of the display. This mold is what the full thing will look like. So I placed a thin bead of white glue along the bottom inside to act as a gasket. I pressed the parts into the mold, and then slowly poured some black resin in to backfill the whole thing. After picking out the latex and making sure that the black resin didn't seep into the cavities, this was the final result. It turned out really nicely. However, to my eyes, the light blue was just a little too yeah, baby. It was just a little too light. So again, I got some coffee, masked off the segments, and lightly dusted them with some matte black. Here's the before and after. The matte black toned it down really nicely. And finally, on the displays, it looks like there's a thin plastic cover. I started with a laser cut piece of plastic and then put these plugs on them. I wanted a little raised lip around the side. I brought that to the vac former and heated up some 0.25 millimeter styrene. This stuff got super thin as it formed. Since it was such a delicate cut, closely spaced, I put it on the laser cutter and ran the same pattern at 5% power, probably 12 times. After that, did a light dusting with matte black, and that was that. You'll notice there are these little holes cut out. They look like they're for retainer tabs. Here I'll use either styrene or bent metal painted black to match. I won't spend a long time talking about the electronics. I'll just give you a quick overview. This is a 480 by 320 TFT. This is an ESP32. I needed something with mucho memory. This is a micro USB holding the Wi-Fi credentials. This is for connection to a GPS module. These are the data and power to the addressable LED displays. This goes to the green LED above the main display. This is 5-volt power in. This is a strip of addressable LEDs that go along the bottom. The lights will chase this way when the ISS is above the horizon. What I did was I took a bitmap map of the Earth, turned it into a binary array, and stored it in program memory. There is an Arduino library called P13, which uses two-line elements, or TLEs, provided by Celestrak.org. These TLEs provide predictive information about objects in the sky. Once a day, this will log into the Wi-Fi, download the TLEs, and use that information to draw the orbital paths as well as the position of the ISS. The binary array is used to restore the background. That way it keeps the image clean and it actually has a nice background instead of a black one. That's pretty much it for electronics. So now on to assembly.
Hi, hon.
Hi.
Lousy weather, eh?
Yeah, it's pretty bad out there. What you got there?
That's just a camera. Dinner's ready.
What is that?
Ain't she a beaut? Do you like it?
Well, does it tell the temperature?
No.